body of information that's been growing and expanding for 25, 30 years, it's very difficult to remove things from this, because the moment I remove a section, you will know that there's something missing. So I really try to put together a linear and connect the dots for audiences to be able to follow without feeling that there are pieces missing. I've done my best, let's do this. So we're going to connect the dots from the ancient past to the present to figure out why the world is so bloody screwed up today, and why most of us, and especially the young people today, find this world utterly, completely incomprehensible. They do not resonate with anything, what's going on. Most of us are confused about what's going on in politics. We don't understand why things are just getting worse and worse and worse when the answers should be so bloody simple. And yet things are just getting more and more complicated. So clearly whatever is going on is going in the wrong direction. And that's why we have things like nostalgia, where we keep reminiscing about the good old days. Isn't that just that alone is a reminder that things used to be better in the past, because they're certainly not getting better into the future. So the concept of nostalgia is a reminder that we should wake up and do something about this future that we're hurtling towards. It's not looking pretty at this stage. But the good news is that there is a shining light at the end of this tunnel, which will end on the very high note tonight. So if you feel at any stage that this information is really dark and depressing, because it can get dark and depressing, I want to remind you that that's just the foundation for the information of what we can do as a species to get ourselves out of this mess. And I like to always work with the positive in mind, because if we don't, then there really is no purpose to this life as I see it today, personally. So why does it matter that we connect the dots from the past? Because if we don't know who we are and where we come from, how could we possibly know where we are going? That's actually a quote from Jurassic Park, believe it or not. So what I'd like to ask you tonight is to keep an open mind at all times, because the information, the further I go down this rabbit hole, the more disturbing it becomes. And I'm sure many of you are aware of this already. And there is no bottom to the rabbit hole. It just gets weirder and weirder and weirder. And some of the information I'm going to share with you tonight is getting to that point where I don't know if I can actually talk about some things in public at this stage. Some things I have to edit myself, because if I talk about some things in public, which I've tried, I come under incredible attacks. And I don't want to alienate any people. My whole purpose is to unite people, not to divide people anymore. We bloody divided enough. So let's share information that actually is going to act as a platform to unify people and give us a direction forward instead of creating more division. So some level of editing is necessary from time to time to keep that unifying factor going. So let's kick this off. The world is covered in countless, unimaginable numbers of ancient, megalithic, ancient sites built by civilizations and people that we know nothing about. Every year, every month, every week, new sites are being discovered. And I know that Hugh Newman, for example, is one of those people that keeps discovering new, incredible sites. Some of the things he shared with me over the last few days just blew my mind. So we have no idea of what happened on this planet. We just literally are like babies waking up from a deep sleep, trying to figure out who we are, where we come from, and why we're here, while there's this unwritten, unknown history of our planet that probably goes back a lot further and is a lot more weird and strange and unimaginable than most of us could possibly fathom. And it's these strange structures like this that were built by some people in ancient times. And when they were finished building this one, they decided to go from South America to just up the road here and build one of these. They said, let's drag a bunch of rocks from Wales and put them up in a circle. And somebody said, well, why should we do that? Because it's cool. And they did that. So they dragged a bunch of rocks, put them in a circle, and it looked cool, and they moved on. And they went into the desert, and they built a big statue because they didn't have any statues. And the reason I realized just recently why they could do all this stuff in ancient times, very simple reason, because they did not have jobs. They didn't have jobs to go to every day. They had all this time on their hands to do stuff with. Say, what shall we do today? Hey, let's go and build some of these pyramidal kind of things right next to this big statue in the desert. So they went and they built big pyramidal stuff, and they went out somewhere out near Israel and built these big platforms with giant rocks. And they went up the mountain in South America, and they built more rocks that fitted into each other. And they thought, wow, it'll freak out people in the future. And they went and built, carved big statues and put them under a roof of solid stone and rock, and because they needed statues and they needed some place to go and worship and offer food to these statues. And then they went up the mountain and they built faces, wall faces with faces sticking out them. And why did they do that? Because it's going to freak people out. And they did that because they had all this time. And then they had a board meeting under a tree like people in ancient times did, like they still do in Africa, because they didn't have jobs, they had just this time, and they had a board meeting under a tree. And one of the guys said, look, what we've never done yet is dig a hole and surround the hole with giant stones. So let's do that. So they did that. Why should we do it? Because we can. So they did that, and then one said, wow, that's amazing, huh? I said, what did I just hear you say? Did you say, huh? Wow, I think that is a really cool letter for an alphabet. We don't have an alphabet yet, but I think let's start with her as a first letter of the alphabet. So they went up the mountain and they carved a whole lot of hers, and they left them behind just to confuse us. And then one of them said, you know what we've never done? We've never carved a whole city out of solid rock. So they went up the mountain and carved a whole city out of solid rock. And they said, we need more pillars on top of a platform. So they built more pillars on a platform. Somebody said, we need more stairs with pillars. So they built more stairs with pillars. And then what is clearly evidential is that these people could hold their breath for a long, long time. Because then they went under the water, under the oceans, and they did this. Only because they could hold their breath. Otherwise, they could never do this. Then they went into the jungles and they built these kind of things. They're really scary. And they built more statues and chopped their heads off because that was freaky. And then another guy said, what we've never done is taken a big rock and hollow the rock out. So they went and they hollowed a bunch of rocks out, and they scattered them throughout Siberia. And then they went back into the desert and they carved out big blocks and put them on top of each other like Lego blocks. And they covered it with sand because they would be fun, just cover it with sand. And then they built this big thing that when you look at it from the top, it vibrates. It looks like it's moving and vibrating. And then they put these bell-like things on top of it to do something, and we don't quite know what it was. And the amazing thing is that they did all this stuff with hammers, chisels, ropes, and pulleys. And this is what our historians are still trying to convince us of today. That is the most remarkable and unbelievable thing. Even the next most unbelievable thing is that pretty much everything I shared with you here so far, all of these structures are either in the northern hemisphere or along the equator. Very little has ever happened in the southern hemisphere. And that's a big problem. Until you discover the vanished civilizations of southern Africa. Because if southern Africa is supposed to be this cradle of humankind that we keep being told about, there must be stuff that happened there in ancient times. And that's exactly what it is. The vanished civilizations of southern Africa is a big, big deal. I've only recently started to realize what a big deal it is, because until I started talking about this and showing this on the large scale in the numbers that we find these ancient ruins in southern Africa, there was very little knowledge or information written or available about that. So welcome to my part of the world and my life, to the stone circles and the vanished civilizations of southern Africa that left behind more than 10 million circular stone ruins that are absolutely spectacular, only when you start looking at them from the air. Each one is completely unique, and some of them are very large, some of them are small, some of them look insignificant, some of them look like beautiful flowers, and you'll notice that they're all connected to each other by these channels. They do not stand alone. You'll notice that they have extended structures that are covered by soil that move away from the stone circles as we see them sticking out of the ground today. And it just goes on and on. What you're looking at is the largest cluster of stone ruins found anywhere in the world today. It makes everything else pale in insignificance. Sometimes they run for 100 by 100 kilometers. Connected, all stone circles that are not standalone. They're all connected by channels and this weird spider's web effect that holds all of these circles and the channels together. And you just see the devastation and the destruction from some event that destroyed all of this a long, long time ago. And then a few of them have been rebuilt and restructured in more recent times. The key thing here is that there are no doors and entrances. So these cannot be dwellings for people or cows or other animals, because clearly they were not built with doors and entrances. They're something else. Archaeological drawings from 1939 clearly indicate that they have no doors and entrances, that they're circular structures all connected to each other by these channels looking like a bunch of grapes here in this image. And sometimes these circles are concentric, connected to each other, all linking to each other. And that is all seated in a large network of agricultural terraces that cover at least 450,000 square kilometers in South Africa and Zimbabwe. Who built these terraces? What were they for? What were they growing? And who were they feeding? In the most recent research that I've found from Anton Parks, if you've not come across Anton Parks yet, I highly recommend that you get his books. They're now available in English. It is a whole new spin and a whole new level on Anunnaki activity. And not just Anunnaki, but many other ancient beings that were not necessarily as benevolent as the Anunnaki. A whole new look at the Sumerian language as a prototype language to pretty much every language in the world today. And in there he suggests that whatever was happening in Southern Africa, they were growing huge amounts of food that were from there they were feeding all the other groups of beings around the world from one central food growing area. And I'm suspecting that this is maybe where, this is why there are so many agricultural terraces, because they were feeding the beings, whether they were Anunnaki or other beings from around the world, from Southern Africa. And these terraces cover entire mountains. Once you start walking around, people that have been on my Stone Circle research journeys with me now, we've just had the second one, you realize the extent of this. It literally makes your jaw just drop down with wonder and amazement how vast this is. The flagship among all these ruins in Southern Africa unquestionably is become known as Adam's Calendar. This site was rediscovered by Johann Heine in 2003, 2004. It is now, as far as I know, the oldest example, or an example of the oldest working sun calendar. It still works. As you can see, the shadow of the rock closest to us casts a shadow on the calendar stone, and it moves from the left to the right, from the summer solstice to the winter solstice, and when it reaches the right edge of that calendar stone, it comes back, so you can still tell every day of the year based on the setting of that sun and the shadow, where the shadow lands. Credo Mutwa's famous Zulu shaman started to weep when I showed him the book Adam's Calendar in 2008. He said he never thought he'd see that special place again, because he was initiated there in 1937. He then proceeded to tell me what a sacred and important place it was in all of human history. And he said it was known as Inzalo Yilanga, or birthplace of the sun, in Zulu shamanic tradition, where humanity was created by the gods to be the slaves in the gold mines. So this is information that's well recorded, knowledge handed down for thousands of years among African shamans, as always completely ignored by mainstream academia and historians. This is the aerial photograph of Adam's Calendar, or Inzalo Yilanga, right on the edge of the cliff there. It drops down about 300 meters there and then goes into the Barberton Valley, which is an entire kilometer below this mountaintop. There's a 3D reconstruction of Adam's calendar where we have a Horus stone. We have 3 stones, the Orion stones that line up with the rise of Orion. North is on the left, south is on the right. And here we have another stone over here that was removed in 1992 and put somewhere else with a plaque on it to commemorate the opening of the Blue Swallow Nature Reserve. Now, if you go from the southern stone on the right between the 2 calendar stones, as you can see there, those are the calendar stones. Oh, I think I have a pointer here, actually. Yes. That's the south-north line. That is south. That is north, and it goes right between the 2 calendar stones. If you continue north to your left, you get to Great Zimbabwe. And if you carry on further north, another 7,000 kilometers, you get to the Great Pyramid of Giza. All perfectly aligned on the 31 degrees east longitudinal line, otherwise known as the Nilotic Meridian. That is also where Linda Tucker has her white lions, the sacred white lions at Timbavati, also sits on the Nilotic Meridian. And then we get to the strange and mysterious tools, stone tools and artifacts that I started collecting. For some reason, when I first arrived here in this place from Johannesburg 11 years ago now, I don't know why I was attracted to certain things, because they didn't make any sense geologically or archaeologically, but I started collecting these weird stones, and thank God for that, because right now those are turning out to be the most valuable and crucial pieces of evidence for this vanished civilization and what was going on there. You can see how happy I was when I picked up that one. And then we have what I call these the bird-shaped stones. Here's another bird-shaped stone. It looks like it was carved, and then the patina has grown over it. And then the weird cone-shaped tools that I started collecting. Just strange cone-shaped tools everywhere, scattered across the mountains. Not to forget the donut stones or the Taurus stones. And there are thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of these donut Taurus-shaped stones scattered throughout southern Africa. And that brings us to the stones that ring like bells, these weird elongated stones that look like French loaves that when you tap them they ring so spectacularly, so beautifully, you would not believe it's a stone, it's a bell. The one at the top here, for example, that clearly looks like it was carved or shaped by somebody. That doesn't look like a normal stone, neither does the one at the bottom, and they both ring at the same frequency. That is the key thing here, when you ring them. And they ring like bells. In fact, that one at the top was the very first tool that I've ever collected. But nothing could have prepared me for the discovery of January 2018, when my first Stone Circle research team accidentally discovered the mud fossils of giants and other creatures. And it was like cognitive dissonance had just suddenly vanished. So once I was blind, now I could see. It's incredible. And we were walking up the mountain with this team. This was in January, and this stone here, that stone there, was lying right beneath my feet. So I picked it up, and once again I just shook my head and I went, why are these stones these weird shapes? What's going on with all these weird shapes, man? And I put the stone down on the wall, one of the walls, and I walked up the mountain and I said, by the time I come down, I'm going to figure out what this is. And I did. As I was coming down, I suddenly started remembering all the stuff I was seeing in my research into mud fossils. And when I looked at that stone again, I picked it up, I went, oh my goodness, this is a rib. And everything changed. And there you can see a collection of many of the fossils. Here we have a shoulder blade. We got one rib here. There's another beautiful elongated rib. And there are just all kinds of body parts that completely and utterly metamorphosized. Now, here's one of the best examples. There's a heart. You can clearly see the aorta, where the aorta goes at the top. You see the coronary artery crossing the heart. This is about 3 times the size of a human heart. So this could possibly fit the shape of an Anunnaki. If the Anunnaki were 3 times the size or twice the size of humans, That could be an Anunnaki heart, completely fossilized, metamorphosized into Hornfels rock. This is a huge problem for geology and metallurgy and chemistry. It seems that when these body parts get trapped in mud and water, they completely and utterly transmutate and transform from whatever organ it was or body part with the internal structure. It completely metamorphosizes into very dense crystalline rock called hornfels in geological terms. When these fossils break and you look at the internal structure, you can't see internal structure. This is the mystery. Only when you look carefully, you start seeing some indications of weird things going on. And you'll see what I mean in a second. But just to the untrained eye, when any of these fossils break,
we may believe that we know all there is to know about ancient secrets, that nothing new can be discovered. But nothing could be further from the truth. We will investigate the origins of civilization in the tales of Adam and Eve. We will move through the heavens with ancient concepts of astronomy and unravel sacred symbols such as the Ark. We will visit pyramids and ancient round towers and connect to harmonic frequencies discovered and utilised by our ancestors. And through these, we will discover the amazing secrets that our ancestors knew and that subsequent generations have forgotten. We will see how the authorities hid and destroyed evidence and further darkened our vision of the past. But we will finally reveal the sacred secrets that shine a light on the true reality of our very existence. Welcome to the Top 10 Ancient Secrets. Across time, there is one little animal, both physical and metaphysical, which persistently crops up: the snake or serpent. There are literally thousands of interpretations given to the symbolism of the snake that we find in ancient texts, artworks, sculptures and structures, and yet they can all be traced to one root source. This is our first and most impressive of the top 10 ancient secrets, because it is still to this day denied by Gyges Church. In the first place, we should understand that the snake is the physical, slithering creature we see around the world, whereas the serpent is the mystical, mythological and metaphysical aspect of the same thing. To begin, we should also understand the root of the word and other related words that give us the various terms around the globe for serpent or snake. The snake is known in the language of Canaan, various words: or, ab, ub, ob, off, op, f, and f. Amazingly, in the Mayan language, Ka means serpent, as in Kukulkan, the bird serpent. And just as in the ancient Sumerian Akan and the Scottish Can for serpent, Vulcan, the Roman god of fire, comes from the Babylonian Kan for serpent and Vol for fire, showing an etymological link across thousands of miles. Indeed, even the very centre of the Christian world, the Vatican, comes from the word Vatis for prophet and Can for serpent, making the Vatican a place of serpent prophecy. The oracle that biblical King Saul appealed to for prophecy was called one that hath Ob, or the priestess of Ob, the snake. The snake worshippers of Moses' time and area were known as Hivites, derived from Hivia, or serpent, the root of Eve. Hivites became Ophites, the early Christian Gnostic serpent worshippers who claimed affinity with the Christians in the 2nd century AD. Indeed, the very children of Israel intermarried with them and served their gods. They were also known as Baalim, from Baal. Baal was a solar god, thought to be an abbreviation of El, the serpent god, or shining serpent. The shining aspect of the serpent reveals a subtle clue. On the one hand, the shining was the illumination believed to have been achieved when under altered states of consciousness, and wherein one sees serpents the world over. This is of course not true enlightenment, as our ancestors regularly pointed out that true illumination derived from knowledge of one's own soul and knowledge of the greater work of the gods. This leads us to the other knowledge, the stars. In literal truth, the serpent was indeed seen in the sky, which shone down upon us. This is why in Egypt, for instance, we will see the sun, or Atum, wrapped with the snake, and why the serpent was worldwide seen as a symbol of the sun. Getting back to Baal, we find that the 20th century writer and historian Bryant remarked that the Greeks called him Belial, which was interpreted to mean a dragon or great serpent. Bel is the Assyrio-Babylonian version of the gods Enlil and Marduk, being the same as Baal. The same Baal seen throughout the Bible. So the Baal in the Bible is a Babylonian serpent god. Could it be that Beltane should be rendered Beltan, both words signifying the dragon or serpent, and showing again a cross-continent link to Europe? Remember that this was a time of year associated with the sun, and the serpent is again here being linked to these astrotheological concepts. In fact, Tanit, or Tanit, was the patron goddess of Carthage in northern Africa, who was also associated with the Tree of Life, like Ishtar and Astarte, and she definitely crossed cultures into Europe. Often, the tree is depicted with wavy lines, said to represent serpents, emerging in symbolic form. The name Tanit means serpent lady, and she is found on many coins in Carthage, associated with the caduceus, and symbolizing the role of Tanit in life, death, and rebirth. She is basically the same as the Queen of Heaven, Astarte, or Isis and Mary. Here, the serpent is associated with the cycles of the moon as the Queen of Heaven, whereas the male serpent is the King of Heaven, the Sun, the one being the mirror of the other. This relates the early Christian Gnostics right back to Babylonian beliefs of serpent worship, which in turn goes across to Egypt and Mesopotamia, in general towards the African ancient serpent cults. Christianity then is related to the most ancient serpent worship known, and if it were not for the destructive covering up of huge amounts of historical data by the Christians, then this would have been all the more obvious. It is a fact that the Christians were ashamed of this law and did all they could to destroy it, not least because it revealed their own deity to be the sun itself. A general term used for early Christian Gnostics was Ophites, although it is probably too strong to call them Christians in the modern sense. Epiphanius said, the Ophites sprung out of the Nicolaitans and Gnostics, and were so called from the serpent which they worshipped. They taught that the ruler of this world was of a draconic form, and the Ophites attribute all wisdom to the serpent of paradise, and say that he was the author of knowledge of men. They keep a live serpent in the chest and at the time of the mysteries entice him out by placing bread before him upon a table. Opening his door, he comes out, and having ascended the table, folds himself around the bread. They not only break the bread and distribute this among the votaries, but whosoever will may kiss the serpent. This the wretched people call the Eucharist. They conclude the mysteries by singing a hymn through him to the Supreme Father. An amazing declaration which speaks volumes. It tells us that, like the ancient Egyptians, the serpent was symbolic of the sun and must constantly entice to rise. Kissing the bread is a simple revelation that the sun indeed feeds us by giving life to our agricultural world. The Eucharist mediator is the serpent, as Christ was the mediator on the cross, a symbol and act more ancient than Christ and rooted itself in serpent worship. The serpent was itself sacrificed on the sacred tree, or Asherah. This also relates to the Roman rites of Bacchus, where snakes were carried in baskets of cakes and bread, the food being given to the votaries. In these bacchanalian rites, there was also the consecrated wine, which was handed around. Remarkably, this ritual used a special chalice or grail, called the cup of the Agathademon, simply meaning the good serpent. This serpent-consecrated cup of wine was handed around after supper, just like the Last Supper of Christ, and was received with much shouting and joyousness. The hymn sung by the serpent to the Supreme Father was just the same as the one sung in the memory of the Python of Delphi on the seventh day of the week. Now, thousands of years later, Christians still take the cup of Christ, called the Good Serpent by the Gnostics, and eat the consecrated bread. This modern ritual is none other than the original but renamed Cup of the Sacred Serpent, which gives the body and blood of our oldest god. A 3rd century Persian teacher known as Manes, who said that Christianity had got things wrong, and he was here to put it right, attempted to revive these old ways. Regardless of the Christian attempts to kill off Manichaeism, it survived until the 13th century. He is said to have revived Ophiolotria, or serpent worship, where he taught that Christ was the incarnation of the great serpent, who glided over the cradle of the Virgin Mary when she was asleep at the age of 1.5 years. But the worship of the serpent was much more ancient than even Manes stated. The chief title of the British serpent god was Hu, the dragon ruler of the world. The title probably giving us Hyas, a name for Bacchus. The druid was known as a Nada, now known as an adder, and the adder was the symbol of the god Hu. It is believed that the druids were Ophites of the original stock. They worshipped also Beli, so in this respect the druids were probably the last truly serpent-worshipping priests in Europe. According to Herodotus, a sacred serpent was fed honey cakes once a month at the Acropolis in Athens. These honey cakes were marked with the omphalos. The superstition of the omphalos was widespread, like the serpent belief, from India to Greece. It is a boss or orb with spiral lines through to represent serpents coiled. These are similar markings on ancient stone monuments across the world, especially at Newgrange in Ireland. Quintus Curtius also pointed out that in Africa there were such stones with spiral lines, said to be a symbol of their serpent deity. To the Etruscans, the omphalos was seen as a route to the underworld. It was placed in a trench called a mundus, or earth, and the first fruits offered into the trench, which was then covered by a huge stone. The entire city was centred on this spot, with all roads leading to and from it. In Greek history, the Delphic oracle was called Pytho, and she was active for over 1,000 years, getting involved in anything from mundane day-to-day prophecies to matters of state. Nobody really has any ideas how the oracle managed to do her business. There are suggestions that volcanic vents issued hallucinogenic chemicals up into the chamber, and suggestions that sacred mushrooms were used. One strange vase, however, may give the clue. A 4th century Vulcan cup shows King Gyges before Pythia, who holds a bowl and stares intently into it. There is no invented drug or mushroom. This is the sacred cup of the Agatha demon, in another form. The prophetic snake yet again. It may also be that this was a unique way of seeing the reflection of the sky, and thereby predicting events from astrological perspectives. As throughout the history of the mystical serpent, it has been associated with powers of future sight, known to us today as precognition. Around the decoration of this cup are the familiar spirals of the snake, and Pythia herself is seated upon the tripod, sacred to the site. Another indication that the serpent is associated strongly with prophecy is the stark fact that the words for divination in Hebrew, Arabic and Greek all mean serpent. This alone indicates that Hebrew, Arabic and Greek are following the same beliefs over a vast period of time. According to Ferguson, the 19th century writer, when we first meet with serpent worship, either in the wilderness of Sinai, the groves of Epidaurus, or in the Sarmatian huts, the serpent is always the Agatha demon, which in ancient Egypt presided over the affairs of men as the guardian spirit of their houses, was the asp of Rana, the snake-headed goddess who represented as nursing the young princess. That the idea of health was intimately associated with the serpent is shown by the crown formed of the asp, or sacred thermosis, having been given particularly to Isis, a goddess of life and healing, and according to Hargrave Jennings in Ophiolitrea, these were no doubt intended to symbolise eternal life. It was the symbol of other deities with likewise attributes. In The Serpent and Shiva Worship by C. Staniland Wake, he remarks about the Muslim saint of Upper Egypt is still thought to appear under the form of a serpent and to cure the diseases which afflict the pilgrims of his shrine. In the same book, we hear of Ramahavali, one of the 4 idols of Madagascar, whose emissaries are serpents. He is regarded as a physician and thought to expel epidemic diseases, much akin to Aesculapius. As God, sacred, powerful and almighty, who kills and makes alive, who heals the sick and prevents diseases and pestilence, who can cause thunder and lightning to strike their victims or prevent their fatality, can cause rain in abundance when wanted, or can withhold it so as to ruin the crops of rice. He is also celebrated for his knowledge of the past and future, and for his capacity to discover whatever is healed or concealed. Ramahavali has basically all the elements of the Agatha demon, the sacred serpent, in one god. He is, like many other serpent deities, in charge of the weather. He has knowledge and wisdom, and above all, he can heal, resurrect, and disperse disease. In the epigraphic records of cures from Epidaurus, there are many methods of healing. The 17th, for instance, states, a man had his toes healed by a serpent. He, suffering dreadfully from a malignant sore on his toe, during the daytime was taken outside by the servants of the temple and set upon a seat. When sleep came upon him, then a snake issued from the abattoir and healed the toe with its tongue, and therefore went back again to the abattoir. Our second ancient secret is the story from Genesis of Adam and Eve. These 2 people are the biblical progenitors of the whole human race. Remarkably, both are related to serpent worship in their Sumerian origins. Clemens Alexandrinus said that the Hevia, the root of Heve, means female serpent. If we pay attention to the strict sense of the Hebrew, the name Evia, aspirated, signifies a female serpent. It is connected to the same Arabic root, which means both life and serpent. The Persians even called the constellation Serpens the Little Ava or Eve. In Old Akkadian, Ad signifies father, and according to C. Staniland Wake in The Origins of Serpent Worship, Adam was closely associated in legend with Seth, Saturn, Thoth or Tautus, who were all associated strong as serpents. No wonder that Abel, the son of Adam and Eve, means serpent shining, and that Cain was thought to be of serpent descent. The other and important point to note is that Adam and Eve were initially immortal, and Eve gained her wisdom via the serpent on the tree of knowledge or life. As for Cain and Abel, well, Abel and Cain were names given to elder and younger brothers, and Abel resolves into Ab, the snake, and El for shining, and therefore is a snake god or shining snake. According to rabbinical tradition, Cain was not the son of Adam at all, but rather the son of Asmodeus, the serpent spirit, who is Harriman in Persian Zoroastrianism. We now move on to our third ancient secret, astronomy. Elements of this ancient science were kept secret for reasons of control. Knowledge of the heavens was not just sacred up to the gods, but also powerful because it aided in navigation. The motion of the planets was seen as serpentine by many cultures. Calendars from Eurasia show representations of the celestial pathway with cycloid movements and serpentine features. The eclipses are shown as one serpent eating another. Similar serpent formations for the celestial pathways are shown across the world, and so it is not surprising to see the serpent represented on the ancient stone monuments of the world, which are aligned to various celestial motions such as midsummer and midwinter. In Greek legend, the father of Aesculapius was Apollo, the sun god. He asked his sacred crow or raven, named Corvus, to go to earth and bring him a cup of fresh spring water. Corvus flew down with a chalice in order to follow his master's instructions. However, by the edge of the water grew a fig tree. The fig is thought to be the tree from the Garden of Eden. The temptation was too much for Corvus to eat the fruit, but it was not ripe, and so the bird waited. When the fruit was ripe, Corvus ate his full until the last of the figs had gone. Then he remembered why he was on earth in the first place, and quickly filled his goblet. However, he suddenly had a thought that he would need an excuse for taking so long. He grabbed a water snake, and together with the cup, flew back to Apollo. He told Apollo that the water snake had attacked him, but Apollo saw the tiny snake and refused to believe the bird. He punished Corvus by turning him black, or sent him into the night time, where he had once been a beautiful silvery white. He gave the bird a raucous crow, and then threw Corvus, the snake, and the cup into the sky. Now we can see the cup as crater, and the snake as Hydra in the stars. The snake was told to keep the cup on his back and never to let Corvus near it, the snake becoming the protector of the cup of the water of the gods. Ophiuchus stretches from the east of the head of Hercules to Scorpion and is partly in the Milky Way and divided by the celestial equator. Ophiuchus, the snake handler, and Serpens, the snake, are seen together, the handler holding the snake. The classicists see Ophiuchus as Aesculapius, the healer. To others, Ophiuchus is one of the Libyan Pursuers, who were noted for their skills in curing snake bites. And to still others, he is Aaron or Moses with their serpent staffs, or St. Paul with his Maltese viper. Again, the word Ophiuchus comes from Ophis for snake and Chi-ro for to handle. sounding remarkably like Chiro, a supposed name for Christ, but a symbol which has much older origins. Serpens, however, is the most unusual constellation in the sky. It is the only one that is split into two parts. The two parts themselves are very telling, as they reveal a distinction between the tail or body and the head of the serpent. Serpens caput is the head of the serpent, and Serpens cauda is the tail of the serpent. Even though the two are separated, they are still and uniquely classed as one. The other important point to remember is that Ophiuchus and Serpens, thousands of years ago, were actually much larger in the sky than they are today. They had more importance to the ancients than we realize. It is a springtime constellation. It is therefore the constellation of new life. And this leads us nicely to our fourth ancient secret. It is a symbol of life like no other, and has been used by many over the centuries. The Ankh, or crux ansata, a simple T-cross surmounted by an oval, called the Rue, which is, simply put, the gateway to enlightenment and new life. It holds all the same symbolic meanings as the cross of Christ. This enigmatic symbol of Egypt represents, quite simply, eternal life, and was often found in the names of pharaohs such as Tut, Ankh, Amun. The symbol is often depicted being held by a god to a pharaoh, giving him life, or held by a pharaoh to his people, giving them life. This basically sets aside the immortals or immortals.
What?
For anyone wearing
What?
carrying
Are
an
you
ankh
serious?
had gained or hoped to gain immortality from the gods of the other world. It is the loop, the rune, or gateway of the ankh, which is
Fucking
held by
curves.
the immortals to the nostrils. It is the same as the biblical God breathing life into the nostrils of Adam. It outlived Egyptian domination and was widely used by the Christians as their first cross. But in this symbol holds a clue to the secret of the serpent. The Egyptian god Thoth was said to have symbolized the four elements with a simple cross, which originated from the oldest Phoenician alphabet as the curling serpent. Indeed, Philo adds that the Phoenician alphabet are those forms by means of serpents and adored them by the supreme gods, the rulers of the universe. This bringing to mind the god Thoth, who again is related to the worship of serpents, and who created the alphabet. Bunsen in the 19th century thought the forms and movement of serpents were employed in the invention of the oldest letters which represent gods. This symbol of the four elements was altered slightly and became the Egyptian Taut, the same as the Greek Tau, which is where we get the name Tau Cross from, a simple T. The T, or Tau Cross, has been a symbol of eternal life in many cultures, and gives it name to the bull in the astrological sign of Taurus. Here are the two elements of the Tau and Ru being brought together. In fact, the Druids or Agars venerated the tree and the snake by scrolling the Tau cross into the tree park, and thereby opening up the gateway. In the Middle Ages, the Tau cross was used in amulets to protect the wearer against disease. Among the modern Freemasons, the Tau has many meanings. Some say it stands for the Temple of Jerusalem, others that it signifies hidden treasure, or means clavis ad thesaurem, a key to treasure, or a place where the precious thing is concealed. It is especially important in royal arch masonry, where it becomes the companion jewel, with the serpent as a circle above the crossbar, forming the ankh with the Hebrew word for serpent engraved upon the upright, and also including the triple tower, a symbol of hidden treasure. It was also the symbol for St. Anthony, later to become the symbol for the Knights Templar of St. Anthony of Leith in Scotland. St. Anthony lived in the 4th century AD, and is credited with establishing monasticism in Egypt, and generally the story goes that he sold all his possessions after hearing from the Lord, and marched off into the wilderness to become a hermit. On his travels, he learned much from various sages in Egypt, and grew for himself a large following. He was sorely tempted by the devil in the form of creeping things and serpents. In one episode, he follows a trail of gold to a temple, which is infested with serpents and takes up residence, needing little food for sustenance other than bread and water. He's said to have lived 105 years, and due to his longevity, he is credited with protective powers. The Order of the Hospitalis of St. Anthony, who would later take much of the Templar wealth, brought many of Antony's relics to France in the 11th century, although they were said to have been secretly deposited somewhere in Egypt just after his death, and then later to have found their way to Alexandria. The tout or tau symbolises the creating four elements of the universe. Next to the symbol of the sun, serpent, was added a simple circle or oval ring. This loop above the T-cross created the Ankh, the symbol of eternity. The snake in a circle eating its own tail is symbolic of the sun and immortality. The symbol of the moon was added to this, turning it into the sign for Hermes or Mercury, and showing the caduceus serpent origin. No wonder that this, the most perfect and simple of symbolic devices, became the symbol of the early Christians. No wonder that, even though there were no cross-beam crucifixions, Christ was nevertheless symbolically crucified on a symbol of eternal life, a symbol of the serpent and access to life eternal. This symbol became the mark or sign, which would set the believer aside for Saviour. In Ezekiel, this is the mark that God will know, the mark on the forehead. As Dean points out, the Ezekiel passage 9:4 should read, "Set a tau upon their foreheads," or mark with the letter tau their foreheads. The early Christians baptized with the term Crucis Thalmate Noter. They baptized with the symbol of the snake. The idea of this sign or mark is widespread once discovered. In Job 31:35, we read in our modern Bibles, "I sound nigh at my defence, let the Almighty answer me," which should properly read, "Behold, here is my tower, let the Almighty answer me." He then goes on to say, "Surely I would take it upon my shoulder."
Yo, what's up, Joey, buddy? What's up, man? Thanks, man.
This
How you
remarkable
doing, dude?
idea of wearing the tower cross on the
you're good,
shoulder
buddy.
as a sign would later become part and parcel of the Crusader Templars' markings.
Thanks,
The
man. I
very same
appreciate that.
Templars who are instigated in the worship of serpents. Also, the Merovingians, said by some to be descended from Jesus and a serpent deity, were also born.
How it runs?
with the
They're
red
going okay.
cross
They're going
between
okay.
their
Thanks,
shoulder
buddy.
blades. The
Thanks,
Tower
man. I
cross
appreciate
is
it.
also strangely used by those practicing sacred geometry.
It's going okay. I had one where I died
This
in the
very
big room.
treasure is the gateway, and
I got
the Tower
shot right
cross
away.
as a
Once you get,
symbol
if you get
of the
shot right
serpent
away, it's like
eternal
you know
life
it's pretty much
is
over.
the method of
In the big
access.
room. Some shit. It's going okay though, man. I'll be honest though, I might sign off
We
in
now
like
move to our fifth
7 minutes or
ancient
so.
Stargates.
I just wanted to play a
For
little bit.
herein lies sacred truths.
I appreciate that you're here though. Yeah, like I'm not even like
Klesson
walking
Harvey
in.
points out that in the pyramids of Saqqara, there are over 3,000 columns of
How are you, man?
texts from the 5th and 6th dynasties, which he believes hold the secrets of the pyramid's use. These texts include incantations and magical formulae that were obviously invoked in certain locations.
It's fine, dude. I'm
around
about
the
to get
pyramid.
some sleep. No worries. Nice.
However,
Cool, buddy.
In one
Nice,
of
man.
these pyramids, and in the upper passage chamber gallery and shaft, is an incredibly old, unmistakable Nagila.
Yo, it's supposed to be spring in Brazil.
Klesson's interpretation
It's gonna be
of this
amazing, man.
glyph or phrase translates remarkably into star door and tunnel opening gate. Short of the fact that glyphs are
Primavera.
lacking from most pyramids, and the Great Pyramid is an example, this information
Saias
is a startling
curtas.
discovery. Indeed, there was probably more information which has now been destroyed, as when Herodotus was said to have visited Egypt in the 5th century BC, the outer casing of the Great Pyramid was awash with hieroglyphics.
Good weather. Honestly, nice, buddy. It's good, man.
Egyptologists claim that the star is mythological and leave it at that. We, however, will not. Could it be that this tunnel and star door is really
Somewhere here is crazy
the
hot,
Shemite
lol.
puzzle,
Yeah.
as star and shining are
I bet,
intimately
man.
linked in meaning, with one having emerged from the trance experience as triggered by the shamanic activity.
I like what
The
it's
star
saying.
symbol, incidentally, is the five-pointed pentacle, and which relates to the head in the whole process of entering
The
the
consistency is
other world.
not very high. I get shot a lot.
Its symbol has remained with us and has remained mysterious ever
I
since.
swear you get shot more
Also,
in
the
on
pentacle is
Japanese.
a perfect device for navigation via the moon and the sun. Therefore, aids in the location of sacred earth energy. The Egyptians call the area of Giza, where the Great Pyramid is situated, Rostam, meaning gateway to the Duat, or other world. And it was the Rostau effect
Stuff
which
sucks a
turned
lot.
man into a god. It is now time that we took an alternative look at the possible science behind these Earth structures.
I like it.
Back in the 70s and 80s, a scientist called Joe Palm decided it was also time to take a look at the Great Pyramid and pyramid shapes in general. And what he discovered is nothing short of amazing. In his experiments, Joe set up a model of the
Fuck
pyramid
me, like.
aligned north, south and east-west, with flat coils placed on the north and south. A blown 1 microfarad capacitor was sparked across the gap using a battery, resistor and chart recorder. This was to simulate the electromagnetic energy of the Earth passing over the pyramid, what are commonly known as Earth energies. The scientists registered the changes on a daily basis, recording the bizarre phenomenon of energy bubble that surrounded the pyramid. Strangely, the energy actually stopped all kinds of radiation, and the bubble showed attenuation to beta emitters, ion sources, and magnetic sources when in the bubble. Feeding the negative ions
What the
into
fuck
the
is
bubble
this,
actually
man?
intensified the energy. The energy was also found to alter over the course of the year, and 13 years of experimentation gave good results. Most peculiar was the effect upon gravity,
Brutal,
which is
man.
linked intrinsically to electromagnetic radiation. It appeared that the bubble actually blocked out the force of gravity, as well as electromagnetic energy, showing a 113,000 times increase in kinetic energy, leading the researchers to theorize that the pyramid actually moved in time and space, a place known to theoretical physicists as H-space or hyperspace. Incredibly, when negative ions were fed into the bubble, the pyramid was drawn to the moon. Positive ions moved it away. An amazing correlation with the feminine and therefore the spiritually negative aspect associated with lunar worship. But what relevance could this have? Well, if, as it can sometimes misleadingly appear, all things point towards the Great Pyramid, then there has to be a good reason for it. Could it be the Great Pyramid was the world mighty and used as an
Really?
entrance to the shamanic underworld of Duat? This seems to have been facilitated by incantations from the pyramid texts and the Book of the Dead, as well as other techniques. The effect caused within the brain, which releases the hormones required for the trance state, is basically electromagnetic and is affected by all manner of ion activity. It therefore appears that the ancient serpent cult were onto this in their own way, perceiving energy as the serpent wave, and worshipping this invisible energy god as a snake. Eventually, gathering sufficient knowledge of this serpent energy, they erected buildings that conducted the energy into a controlling element, with the effect of the plugs in the air vents having a resonance also upon the electromagnetic energy. We can see how it could have been specifically honed and finely tuned to create the effect. But let us leave the pyramid for a while and move to number 6 on our list of ancient secrets, the round towers. These round structures are worldwide and number in their hundreds, and strangely, they are linked to the serpent in almost every instance. Tall, elegant, round structures built by cultures as diverse as the Irish Celts and the early Christians, to the Hopi Indians and Egyptians, all of which are linked to serpent worship. In Ireland, there are over 65 round towers, many over 100 feet and claimed by academics to be no more than 1,000 years old. However, as with most Christian buildings, they are generally built upon a much more ancient religious ground, and indeed, many of them can be proven to be older than first believed. Some even have churches built onto them, as if to attach the church to the ancient serpent worship physically. Historian and writer Gradwell in the 19th century pointed out that St. Patrick and his followers almost invariably selected those sacred sites of paganism and built their wooden churches under the shadow of the round towers, then as mysterious and inscrutable as they are today. Some claim these structures were fire temples dedicated to sun worship, and it is easy to see why, especially when we discover that sun worship is connected to serpent worship. Others claim them to be watchtowers, which would relate nicely to the ancient Sumerian and Semite term for the serpent cult, as watchers. In fact, Hargrave Jennings, author of Ophir Latreia, relates them to the obelisk, that ancient phallic and serpent-derived pillar to the heavens. These towers are also found close by rivers, streams and holy wells, and this not only raises the question of earth energy caused by the watercourse, but also is very telling that the serpent deities were always associated with watery places. Water was indeed the subterranean home of the serpent race, and was the entrance to the underworld or other worlds, which is where the trance state was intended to take them. But it is this association with water which seems to be important to such structures, and in terms to Earth-related electromagnetic energy. There may indeed also be an important link between round towers and the Phoenicians, who had similar structures dedicated to their rain and water deity Baal. There are thousands scattered across Sardinia, just north of the Phoenician city of Carthage, dating to at least 2,000 years before Christ. There are also those who believe that these round towers served as astronomical tools, like Stonehenge for instance, and this may be the case. The towers in Iran, called Radkan, meaning serpent, are thought to be these, and like the European towers of a much later date, they have conical caps. It has long been theorised that stone circles in ancient monuments are to be found on Earth energy lines, known as ley lines. Many have theorised that these standing stones are magnetic acupuncture points on the Earth, and that by lining them strategically, the ancients were building the energy pathway for some unknown reason. The power found within the rocks, according to scientist Callahan, came from millions of years
I
of
think
grinding and crushing.
thanks for being here. I'm gonna
drifting
sign off and maybe
and that energy
a few more runs.
within the
Sorry.
minerals that make up the
was
various
wanted to see how I
materials.
was feeling tonight. Got an
Giving
hour in.
language to this theory, Callahan calls the positive and negative electromagnetic forces found within the rocks paramagnetism and diamagnetism, respectively. He claims that these
Thanks for
forces
being here, though. I
were
appreciate
known
it.
in ancient times by the Chinese as yin and yang, and by the Irish as fairies and leprechauns, the powers within the earth. It was Callahan who discovered the tachyon, which many had said did not exist. This is a particle that actually moves faster than the speed of light, something we now know others do via quantum entanglement. If mankind could utilise such a particle, it would actually be able to receive a message sent using the tachyon before it had been sent, thereby upsetting some fundamental laws of physics. Callahan states that we must treat rocks, stones and even soil as antenna collectors of magnetic energy waves. And it is this statement which revolves around the round tower theory as being earth antennas. However, he also points out that as fertile land is derived from volcanic activity, it too is an antenna, a flat one. Using this theory, he has gone on to show how practical applications can come from this
Yeah, I
research
was
by
consistent when I
improving the
started,
growth
but
of
now I'm
plants
not
by
at
using
all.
the magnetism of the soil. He even claims that by building small round towers in the garden, we too can help growth of plants. Basing the hypothesis of his work in insect antennae and the capacity to resonate electromagnetic waves, Callahan hypothesized that the tall round towers were made to be earth antennas, and that even similar buildings or structures around the globe could also be seen for the same reason.
Alright, this is the last
He
run. Thanks for
believed
being here. Really
before his
appreciate it.
time that the energy would be passed on to those meditating at the site.
Alright, let's at least get like a good start.
Of the towers tested in Ireland, Callahan found that the iron-rich rock that they were made from indeed
No, I'm like
helped
already
this effect.
mentally checked out. Yeah, I'm
The
gonna
towers
stop right
made
now.
from materials such as limestone and granite were still paramagnetic. Callahan goes on to show how the rubble within these towers, which has baffled people for decades, was truly there as a tuning implement. And all of this brings us to number 7 in our top 10 ancient secrets, the harmonic alignments. One researcher, Boris Said, is quoted as having said, subsequent experiments carried out by Tom Daly in the King's Chamber of the Great Pyramid and in chambers above the King's Chamber suggest that the pyramid was constructed with a sonic purpose. Danley
Oh, that's it.
identifies 4 resident
I'm out.
frequencies or notes
Thanks so much for
that
being
are
here. I really
enhanced
appreciate
by
it.
the
I really do.
structure of the pyramid.
Joe,
And by the
thank you, my
materials
fan.
used
Thank
in
you
its
very much.
construction. The notes form an F-sharp chord, which according to ancient Egyptian texts was the harmonic of our planet. Moreover, Danley's tests show that these frequencies are present in the King's Chamber even when no sound is being produced. They are there
Eric's
in
online, we're gonna read
frequencies
Eric,
that
that's
range
what
from
we're
16 Hz down to a half a Hz, well below the range of human hearing. According to Danley, these vibrations are caused by the wind blowing across the ends of the so-called air shafts. In the same way,
Oh,
the
thanks for
sounds
being here,
are
Joey.
created
Thank you
when one
very much.
blows
Appreciate it very
across the
much.
top of a bottle. Strangely, we find that F-sharp is actually
Oh,
the
man.
resonant chord of the
Well, that was
earth,
fun.
and that the Egyptians knew
Okay,
this.
thank you.
is
Appreciate it.
startling. Mr. Sayre
Really, I do.
goes on in a separate interview
Demais.
to point out that a Native American maker of sacred flutes from
Até
Oregon
o próximo.
also makes his flutes tuned to the key of F sharp. We may also note that, as Callahan had previously pointed out, the importance of certain stones in connection to electromagnetism. The stones of these tuned passages were granite, a specific paramagnetic rock. Boris Said also points out